I've always been intrigued by how some folks find a certain calm in being by themselves. I remember years ago watching an old neighbor sit on his porch every evening, sipping tea and staring at nothing in particular. He wasn't looking at his phone or chatting with anyone. He just seemed at ease in his own company, as though the quiet was his companion. At the time, I thought it was a bit odd who voluntarily spends so much time alone. But now that I'm older, I realize there's something special about people who truly enjoy solitude. It's like they've tapped into a hidden well of peace that many of us don't even know exists. They don't need a crowd to feel whole, and they carry a grounded presence that's comforting to be around. Before I go any further, I'd love to know where you're joining me from right now. And if you find value in these reflections about solitude and self-discovery, a simple like or a subscription would mean a lot. It lets me know you appreciate these quiet, thoughtful discussions, and it encourages me to keep sharing these insights. Sometimes, just knowing there are folks out there who connect with a calmer way of looking at life is enough to keep this conversation going. Over the years, I've come to see that people who like being alone often have certain traits in common. The first thing you might notice is their deeper level of self-awareness. Because they spend more time in reflection, they learn to recognize their own emotional patterns and personal triggers. They might understand exactly what calms them down when they're upset, or how to prevent small annoyances from spiraling into big problems. While others tend to reach for entertainment or distraction the moment boredom sets in, these individuals take a different route. They let their thoughts roam free, and in doing so, they gain a better grasp of their own minds. That self-understanding often translates to a quiet strength, because when life gets complicated, they don't panic as easily. They already know how to sit with discomfort and let it pass, and they trust that they can handle the storms that inevitably blow in. I've also noticed how keenly observant these folks can be. In a room full of people, they're often the ones listening closely rather than dominating the conversation. They pick up subtle shifts in tone, changes in someone's posture, or the little hesitation in a voice that suggests deeper feelings. Because they're comfortable in silence, they don't have to fill every pause with words. This makes them better listeners and more empathetic friends or colleagues. It's not unusual for someone who enjoys solitude to notice that a friend is hurting long before anyone else does. They've trained themselves to see what's below the surface. It's a quiet kind of superpower. They rarely brag about it. It's just part of who they are. Another trait that stands out is their resourcefulness. When you don't rely on constant company, you tend to get good at figuring things out for yourself. Maybe you learn basic car repairs by watching a tutorial, or you try a new recipe even if no one's around to taste test. There's a willingness to attempt tasks independently that builds confidence over time. Rather than saying, "I can't do this without help," you say, "Let me see what I can figure out on my own." Now, being resourceful doesn't mean they never ask for assistance. They simply know they can rely on their own creativity and persistence when the situation calls for it. That skill can be incredibly useful, especially when something unexpected happens and immediate help isn't available. When you get to know someone who enjoys solitude, you might also see that they form deeper connections in the relationships they do have. Their inner circle could be small, but the bonds they build are significant. Because they don't spend all their energy on casual acquaintances, they can focus on the people who truly matter to them. You might find they're the kind of friend who remembers your favorite snack or follows up about an issue you mentioned weeks ago. Even though they might not be the life of every party, they show up in meaningful ways. Their loyalty and thoughtfulness can run very deep. There's a certain authenticity in how they engage with friends and family, and that authenticity stands out in a world where surface-level connections are often the norm. One of the more practical advantages they enjoy is a healthy sense of personal boundaries. They know when they need to step back, rest, or simply have a quiet day to recharge. This doesn't mean they're antisocial, Rather, they understand that too much external stimulation can be draining. By saying no to some invitations or limiting interactions, they're not being rude. They're just protecting their mental and emotional space so they can stay balanced. Over time, that creates a sense of stability that can be quite beneficial. They're less likely to overcommit themselves, leading to fewer instances of burnout or resentment. And because they respect their own limits, they're often able to show up more genuinely when it really matters. Another special quality is how creativity often flourishes in solitude. The mind, given time and space, can wander into uncharted territory and produce fresh ideas. It's not that every solitary person is an artist or inventor, but they do tend to explore their thoughts more fully. That might mean writing a poem, coming up with a new business idea, or simply imagining different solutions to a personal challenge. Because they're not always looking outward for entertainment, they develop an inner world that's rich in possibilities. Some of the greatest thinkers in history valued long stretches of isolation, precisely because that's where breakthroughs often happen. Even in everyday life, that spark of creativity can make routine tasks more interesting or open the door to new hobbies. I've also noticed a quiet confidence in people who find comfort in their own company. They're not always seeking validation from others, which can be a huge relief in a society that seems hooked on attention. Instead, they've learned that being alone doesn't have to be lonely, and that the strongest relationship you can cultivate is the one you have with yourself. This confidence doesn't necessarily manifest in big gestures or flamboyant actions. It's more of a steady calm, rooted in the belief that they don't have to prove themselves at every turn. They can enjoy a night at home with a good book, and they don't feel the need to justify it. When they step into social settings, they can do so without desperation or pretense, because they aren't relying on the group's approval for their sense of self-worth. One trait that might surprise you is how compassionate solitary people can be. On the surface, you might think, if they like being alone, they must not care about others. But that's rarely true. Often they've spent a lot of time processing their own emotions and struggles, which helps them empathize when someone else faces hardship. They're good at offering support without overshadowing the other person's experience. They might not be loud about it, but they're the ones quietly checking in on a friend who's going through a rough patch, or sending a kind message when they sense someone needs it. Their thoughtfulness can be easy to overlook because it's subtle, but once you see it, you understand just how deep their compassion runs. All these characteristics, self-awareness, observation, resourcefulness, deep connections, boundaries, creativity, quiet confidence, and compassion can manifest in different ways depending on the person. You may see only a few of them in one individual or a blend of all 8 in another. It's not a strict checklist, but rather a series of tendencies that often flourish in solitude. And just because you like being alone doesn't mean you have all these traits fully developed. We're all works in progress, growing and learning at our own pace. The key is to recognize the potential benefits of embracing a bit of solitude from time to time. Too often we're taught that loneliness and solitude are the same thing, but that's not quite accurate. Loneliness is about feeling isolated and disconnected, while solitude is a deliberate choice to spend time with yourself for reflection, rest, or growth. Some people might argue that being alone goes against human nature, since we're inherently social creatures, but life isn't a one-size-fits-all experience. Some thrive in big groups, while others gravitate toward quiet corners. What truly matters is finding what aligns with your own nature. If you've ever felt at peace during a slow morning with no obligations, or a quiet walk where the only sounds are your footsteps, you might have a taste of what I'm talking about. There's a sense of wholeness that can come from knowing you're enough all by yourself. That doesn't mean you never seek companionship, but it does mean you're comfortable with the times when it's just you and your thoughts. It's a skill that can anchor you in a world that often feels frantic. I think it's good for everyone to experiment with solitude, even if it's just for a short stretch each day. Maybe you take 15 minutes to sit outside and watch the sky change color, or perhaps you start your morning journaling before the rest of the house wakes up. These little pockets of alone time can help clear the mental clutter. If you're open to it, you might even discover one of the traits we've talked about awakening inside you, like a sharper sense of observation or a budding creative spark. It might feel strange at first, especially if you're used to constant interaction, but it can quickly become a habit you look forward to. If some of these points resonate with you, there's a good chance you already know the value of solitude. Perhaps you're someone who finds renewal in moments of quiet reflection. Maybe you're still learning the ropes and trying to balance your social life with the need to recharge. Wherever you stand, remember there's no single correct way to be. It's about respecting your own nature and taking the time to understand yourself without the pressure of outside expectations. That's something I wish I'd learned sooner, how to tune out the noise and simply listen to the gentle whispers of my own mind. It's a process, but it can lead to a more centered, compassionate, and genuinely fulfilling life. Thank you for spending these moments with me. If you haven't yet mentioned where you're watching from, I'd still love to know. And if you found any clarity or encouragement in what we've discussed, a like or a quick subscription is a simple way to show you're part of this calmer conversation. However you decide to move forward, I hope you carry with you the idea that choosing solitude can be a beautiful and meaningful gift to yourself. In learning to be at home within your own thoughts, you just might discover a side of yourself that feels more authentic, more creative, and more at peace than you ever expected. Take good care, and don't forget that sometimes the best company you can keep is your own.